I'm just trying to give you guys a lesson.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Being better people. Because bad things can happen if you don't follow rules and do things the right way.
I can always be a better person. Lord knows I have the mind of a kindergartner.
You can't mess around with things. You have to follow the rules.
No.
Bad things can happen.
Sure.
Have you guys ever heard of JAL 123?
Sounds like a curse.
Sounds like the Macarena.
Yeah.
Is this a funny...
Is it horrible?
Is it bad? Is it terrible?
It's terrible.
Oh,
Damn it.
I feel bad. I'm so sorry.
Every time.
Japan Airlines Flight 123, or JAL 123, experienced in-flight structural failure that resulted in a very deadly crash on August 12th, 1985.
Ooh, getting closer.
But what exactly happened that day to cause this crash? Well, it's actually what happened years before. The aircraft was involved in a tail strike incident in Osaka International Airport 7 years earlier. And a tail strike is when a plane is either taking off or landing and it comes in too steep and all the weight breaks the back of the tail.
Terrifying.
Yes. So it damages the aircraft's rear pressure bulkhead. That's what that's called. But the repair they actually didn't do correctly. It did not conform to Boeing's approved repair methods.
Seems like rear pressure bulkhead. You need that.
Yeah, sounds pretty important.
Pretty much every single thing on a plane.
It all sounds pretty important.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to save on weight and everything, you're really only going to have the essentials on a plane, correct?
Yeah.
One would hope.
I would hope, yeah.
So for reinforcing a damaged bulkhead, the correct way, it calls for one continuous spliced plate with 3 rows of rivets. But they did actually 2 instead of one continuous, so that actually compromised the bulkhead.
Adds more stress possibilities.
Correct.
Jesus.
So it actually reduced the part's resistance to fatigue cracking to about 70%.
Ooh.
This aircraft was a Boeing 747, and it was on the 5th of its 6th planned flights for that day. There were 15 crew members, including 3 cockpit crew and 12 flight attendants. In command was Captain Takahama Masami, and he was age 49, and he was a veteran. He had logged about 12,400 total flight hours, and almost 5,000 of those were accumulated flying 747s.
So the guy knew his plane.
He knew what he was doing. But he was actually first officer that day because he was supervising the captain of the flight that day, which was First Officer Yutaka Sasaki, and he was in line for a promotion. He had about 4,000 total flight hours, and about 3,000 of those, just under 3,000 of those hours were in 747s.
Knows what he's doing.
Yeah, extremely experienced.
Confident behind the wheel.
Is that a Boeing 747?
A Boeing 747.
Okay.
And
Boeing.
actually, this one was technically 747-146 SR, which is short range because it was just flying within the country.
Good to know. Short range, but it's a BOEING.
Wait, short range, like a 2-hour flight? Fuck.
Mm-hmm.
Damn it.
Then you also have flight engineer Fukuda Hiroshi, a veteran flight engineer, and he had about 9,800 total flight hours, and almost 4,000 of those were accrued flying 747s. So these guys were extremely experienced.
These are not noobs.
Correct.
Over 20,000, easy.
Yes.
Over 20,000 combined flight hours.
After more than an hour on the ramp, Flight 123 pushed back from Gate 18 at 6:04 p.m. and took off from runway at Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan, at 6:12. 12 minutes behind schedule. 12:12. And about 12 minutes after takeoff.
12.
Was this AM or PM?
This is at PM.
Okay.
So took off at 6:12.
12.
12 minutes behind.
12.
And 12 minutes after takeoff.
12.
Cruising altitude over Sagami Bay, the aircraft's aft pressure bulkhead burst open.
Son of a bitch.
Due to that pre-existing defect that was incorrectly repaired from 7 years before, that tail strike accident.
This took 7 years to break.
7 years to break. Which actually you have to say, I mean, you think about how many flights a plane takes. This was its 5th out of 6 flights this plane was taking just that day.
That day, right.
Planes are like computers. They're always on, right? Are they not?
Yeah.
Basically, I guess. I mean, I'm sure they might rotate them out in some capacity so they can do maintenance and everything, you'd hope.
So once that aft pressure bulkhead burst, this caused a rapid decompression of the aircraft, bringing down the ceiling around the rear lavatories, damaging the unpressurized fuselage aft of the bulkhead, unseating the vertical stabilizer. Does this mean anything to anybody? And
like
severing all
fuselage.
4 hydraulic lines.
The vertical stabilizer is the thing that, keeps it going.
Correct.
If you don't have that, you're just constantly spiraling out of control.
Correct. So it's screwing up all of those things. And severing all 4 hydraulic lines. A photograph actually was taken from the ground, confirmed that the vertical stabilizer was missing.
God.
So there was proof that it did, get completely pulled off. The pilot set their transponder to broadcast a distress signal, and air traffic control directed the emergency landing to be at Nagoya Airport, which was just about over halfway to Osaka, which is where they were going. But Captain Takahama was like, "No, fuck that. We can't do that. This shit's totally broken. We gotta go back." So he was trying to turn the plane around to go back to Haneda.
Just bank that motherfucker.
But that's when they lost control of the plane completely.
This was 12 minutes into the flight?
12.
Yes. Hydraulic fluid completely drained resulted in loss of hydraulic control and non-functional control surfaces. Plus the lack of stabilizing influence from the vertical stabilizer, which was gone, the aircraft began this up and down oscillation in a fugoid cycle.
Oh,
So
it's a fucking rodeo thing, right? It's like a fucking...
Bucking bronco, exactly.
Oh, it had to be an absolute joy
Right?
for the passengers.
Oh, my God.
Just praying and praying and screaming and praying.
Sounds like a fucking nightmare.
They were doing everything they could to try to get control, like lowering the landing gear, the flaps interfered with control by the throttle.
To try to, create drag.
Correct.
Yeah, slow
and
it down.
But the control of it completely deteriorated. Upon descending to 13,500 feet, the pilots reported an uncontrollable aircraft. Heading over the Izu Peninsula, the pilots turned towards the Pacific Ocean, then back towards the shore. They descended below 7,000 feet before returning to a climb. So they were just going up and down and up and down and all over the place. The aircraft reached 13,000 feet before entering an uncontrollable descent into the mountains and disappearing from radar at 6:56 p.m. So they took off at 6:12 and they disappeared from radar at 6:56 p.m. So these guys were holding, 12 minutes into that flight, they were trying to control this plane for that long.
Just the amount of effort, just because when you look at the plane's controls, there's just so much going on. And so to try to wrestle that sort of machinery when it's fighting against you, it's just got to be a nightmare.
Oh, yeah. And especially being a veteran, just being like, there's everything that I know.
Yeah, I've tried everything possible.
Everything that, there's nothing. And if you look actually at the map, they have it tracked. They were all over the place.
But
the plane was going one way, and then it was east, and then it was south, and then it was north.
I wonder if it's visible from the ground, because people had to be flipping out seeing that.
So this was 20-something minutes, after that explosion, 12 minutes in, or whatever happened
at
with that repair?
At 6:24, this is when the plane lost control. That's when the vertical stabilizer blew. So, and then they lost contact with the plane at 6:56 at about 6,000 feet, or about 7,000 feet.
Jesus
Been
Christ!
a half hour careening through.
Mm-hmm.
How?
Probably felt like a day and a half.
Oh yeah.
Yep. I guess it wasn't at cruising altitude, but
no, they were at cruising altitude when
12 minutes in, yeah.
Yeah.
So they were at cruising altitude going 500 fucking miles per hour when something snapped, and then they kept it going for 32 minutes. Yep. Until it fucking finally hit that zero elevation. That's a fucking long time.
Yes.
And that takes skill.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Jeez. But that's 20,000 hours of flying that one vessel.
They did the best they could with what they had. Who knows? It could have gone down way faster with anyone who was less experienced than they were.
But would that have been better?
Yeah, I know, right?
That's the thing.
Maybe.
It's really horrible to think about. It's if it's going to go down either way, do you want it to happen in 5 minutes or 35 minutes?
Well, here's the thing.
But you don't want to hit buildings and take out other people also.
This is true. And maybe it would have been better because in the final moments, the wing clipped a mountain ridge, plunged again. The plane then slammed into a second ridge and then flipped and landed on its back. So it didn't have a nice landing at all. The aircraft's crash point was at an elevation of 5,135 feet. And someone from...
Okay, so, that's still way high up. I mean, I guess Japan is kind of like West Virginia, where it's like.
Well, this is
mountains,
what I was about to say, is that Egg Magnuson of Time Magazine said that the area where the aircraft crashed was referred to as the Tibet of the Gunma Prefecture.
Not the place.
Jesus.
So it's
not
kind
the
of
place you
known
wanna
as the
land.
mountain range.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And
Because it's so easy to get to Tibet.
right.
When you think easily traveling, you think Tibet.
I know 3 friends who have gone.
So this affects, the rescue efforts
Yeah.
when it's in rocky terrain like that, very, very hostile terrain. Casualties reported of the crash included all 15 crew members and 505 of the 509 passengers, so only 4 people survived.
People survived?
Yeah,
People survived
4 people
this.
made it out of that
Jesus
nightmare.
fucking Christ.
The sad thing is that some passengers actually did survive the initial crash, but then died of their injuries hours later.
Hours later.
Well, when you're laying in Tibet
God, laying in Japanese Tibet, dying of exposure.
of a plane crash, like what happened?
Dying of a plane crash.
I got plane crashed, so
I got plane
I need
crashed.
help. I need help.
And you didn't finish the job.
So Tibet's going to go ahead and take
Yeah.
care of it
Take
for me
care
now.
of it for me.
Jesus
Strong.
Oh my
Strong
God.
people.
That is intense.
But yeah, it's mostly they died because of the delays of the rescue operation. And it remains the deadliest single aircraft accident. So whereas Mandaddy's story from earlier, 2 planes were involved, this is the single aircraft accident, like one of the worst. So the thing is that the Air Force, the United States Air Force, was in the area and at the Yokota Air Base, and they had been monitoring the distressed aircraft calls. So they were actually maintaining contact with the flight officials, and they were trying to make a landing strip available. And then after losing track on radar, the Air Force was asked to search for the missing plane. So, and they actually were the first to spot the crash site 20 minutes after impact, while it was still daylight. So remember, this was in August, and this was at 7 o'clock when they crashed. And I think where it is in latitude, it stays like pretty late in summer. So they did have some time. However, the Air Force did offer an assistance to recover the crash, but they were actually told to stand down and that the Japanese self-defense forces were going to take care of it. So
Like, we
the
got
U.S.
this.
found it within 20 minutes. They were like, we can try to get down there to help. And Japan was like, no, we got this. Don't worry about it. And like,
Politics.
stand down.
Yeah, maybe they had to like
They had a safe face.
Safe face, yeah.
A Japan self-defense force helicopter did spot the crash. And however, the pilot said that there were no signs of survivors. So basically they were like, let's just set up some base camp and wait out till the morning. We can go in and check everything out.
That seems so irresponsible. Yeah, they're all dead. They're all totally dead. Let's stop, have a snack. We'll take care of it in the morning.
So they went up, set up some tents, like made some dinner. Like, we're going to get up in the morning and look at this terrible
Really,
crash
like,
site.
knock this plane crash thing out
Yeah.
tomorrow, like fresh, because today
I'm kind of, just a little achy, a little.
it's been a long one,
It
man.
has. We're in the Tibet of Japan, for God's sakes.
So sadly, medical staff found bodies with injuries suggesting that individuals had survived the crash,
Jesus,
only
damn
to
it.
die from shock, exposure overnight in the mountains, or from injuries that, if tended to earlier, would not have been fatal.
Oh, God.
One doctor said if the discovery had come 10 hours earlier, we could have found more survivors.
10 hours. Jesus.
So the crazy thing was that there was an off-duty flight attendant on this flight, and she is actually one of the 4 survivors.
Ooh.
And she said that from her hospital bed that she was reporting that she recalled bright lights after the crash, the sound of helicopters, and shortly after she awoke, and she was amid the wreckage, and she could hear screaming and moaning from the other survivors, and these sounds gradually died away during the night.
Oh, that's sad.
But seeing the helicopters being, and then we're
Right.
like, okay, where'd they go? And do I smell something cooking? Is someone making dinner up there? I mean, that's just to think that you have hope, and then
Yeah, so the idea that you have hope,